The cold morning wind swept through the towers of Coimbra Castle when the one who would become one of the most venerated figures in Portuguese history was born. It was the year 1200, and Portugal was still breathing the air of a young kingdom, forged in battles against the Moors and strengthened by the Christian faith that ran through the veins of its rulers. On that winter dawn, within the stone walls that guarded the secrets of royalty, Mafalda Sanchez was born, daughter of King Sancho I of Portugal. The child's cry echoed through the palace corridors like a harbinger. This was not just another infant being born. It was a soul destined to transform pain into hope, power into service, and tears into miracles. Her first cries already seemed to carry a different melody, as if angels were whispering divine plans into her ear. Queen Dulce of Aragon held in her arms the little girl with clear and intense eyes, unaware that she was embracing a future blessed one. King Sancho I, a man of war and of faith, gazed at his daughter with a blend of fatherly tenderness and prophetic intuition. There was something special about that child, a light that seemed to shine even in her earliest days. The royal chambers of Coimbra breathed history. The limestone walls, crafted by the kingdom's finest artisans, held the echoes of prayers and decisions that shaped the destiny of a nation. It was there, among tapestries embroidered with gold and silver thread, that Mafalda would take her first steps. But her small, delicate feet already seemed to seek a path different from the one laid out for princesses of her time. The 13th century was dawning alongside Portugal, and the two were growing together under the protection of the cross. It was a time when faith and politics walked hand in hand, when kings and queens not only ruled territories but also guided souls. The Portuguese court bustled with troubadours, crusader knights returning from the Holy Land with tales of miracles, and monks carrying scrolls filled with divine wisdom. Mafalda grew up immersed in this atmosphere of devotion and grandeur. Her early years were shaped by the morning prayers echoing in the royal chapel, the tolling bells marking the canonical hours, and the stories of saints and martyrs that her mother would tell her at bedtime. The girl absorbed every word like a sponge soaks up water, and her eyes sparkled with a wisdom far beyond her tender age. The royal palace was a miniature universe. In the main halls, diplomats debated treaties and alliances. In the kitchens, the aroma of spices from the east mingled with the smell of freshly baked bread. In the gardens, a fountain of crystal-clear water murmured a constant melody, while roses and jasmines filled the air with their sweetness. And amidst all this activity, Mafalda walked with a serenity that caught everyone's attention. From a young age, she showed a natural inclination toward charity. When the poor gathered at the castle gates seeking alms, the little infanta insisted on joining the distribution of bread and coins. Her delicate hands touched the wrinkled faces of beggars with a tenderness that brought them to tears. "This girl has the heart of a saint," whispered the maids who cared for her. Mafalda's childhood was marked by a refined education, as befitted a princess of her time. She learned Latin from Benedictine monks, music from court masters, and domestic arts from her mother's ladies-in-waiting. But it was in theology and sacred history that she truly excelled. She memorized entire passages from scripture and asked questions that surprised even the most learned clergymen. Her father's kingdom was thriving, but not without challenges. The borders were still under constant threat, and the consolidation of Portuguese territory required ongoing vigilance. Sancho I was known as the Populator for his dedication to founding cities and strengthening the kingdom's defenses. Mafalda grew up watching her father balance sword and cross, war and diplomacy, always with the goal of protecting his people and their faith. This atmosphere of responsibility and dedication to the common good deeply shaped the young princess's character. She understood from an early age that being born into royalty was not just a privilege, but also a calling to serve. She observed how her parents made difficult decisions, always weighing the consequences for the kingdom and for Christendom. These unwritten lessons were etched into her heart like letters of fire. By the time Mafalda turned 10, her beauty was already the talk of the court. Hair like golden wheat, eyes as blue as the summer sky, and a smile that radiated kindness. She was the embodiment of Portuguese nobility, but those who truly knew her understood that her real beauty lay in something much deeper, a pure soul that sought God in every moment of the day. The first signs of her special vocation began to show during her adolescence. While other young girls her age dreamed of tournaments and balls, Mafalda spent hours in prayer in the royal chapel. She fasted voluntarily and gave away her personal jewelry to those in need. When questioned about these actions, she answered simply, "Everything we have comes from God. How can we keep for ourselves what belongs to the poor?" King Sancho. I watched his daughter's behavior with a mix of pride and concern. He knew he would need to arrange a suitable marriage for her, as tradition and the politics of the time demanded. But he also sensed that Mafalda had a calling that transcended social conventions. In private conversations with the Queen, he would confess, "Our daughter is not like the others. God has special plans for her." Fate, however, was already drawing its mysterious paths. When Mafalda turned 15, envoys from King Henry I of Castile arrived at the Portuguese court. The young Castilian monarch, only a few years older than the Portuguese princess, was seeking a wife who could strengthen the bonds between the two Iberian kingdoms. The negotiations were long and delicate, involving dowries, territories, and military alliances. Mafalda received the news of her future marriage with the resignation of someone who had learned from an early age that God-S will often manifests through the duties imposed by life. She did not cry or protest. Instead, she withdrew to the chapel for 3 consecutive days, fasting and praying for the Lord to show her how to fulfill His will through this new path unfolding before her. During those hours of intense prayer, Mafalda experienced her first mystical vision. She saw herself walking down a long stone corridor lit by flickering candles. At the end of the corridor, a golden and gentle light awaited her. A voice, sweet as honey and powerful as thunder, said to her, "Daughter, your path will be long and at times painful, but in every cross you carry, you will find my presence. And when you think all is lost, that will be the very moment when your true work begins." That vision filled her heart with peace and determination. She understood that her marriage to Henry of Castile was not merely a political alliance, but part of a greater, divine plan. She rose from the kneeler with eyes shining with a new light, and when her parents came to speak with her about the wedding arrangements, they found a transformed young woman ready to embrace her destiny with faith and courage. Preparations for the wedding took months. Seamstresses came from all over Europe to create the most beautiful dress Portugal had ever seen. Goldsmiths worked day and night to forge jewelry worthy of a future queen. Master chefs planned banquets that would be remembered for generations. Yet amid all the bustle, Mafalda remained serene, as if she were only a spectator in her own story. On the eve of her departure for Castile, she visited all the cherished places of her childhood one last time. She walked through the gardens where she had played as a child, climbed the towers where she had watched countless sunrises, and lingered long in the chapel where she had said her first prayers. At each place, she whispered a farewell and a prayer, as if sealing a pact with her memories. Thus, at 16 years old, Infanta Mafalda of Portugal prepared to leave her homeland and begin a new chapter of her life. She did not yet know that her journey to Castile would be only the first step in a much longer and more transformative path. She could not have imagined that the tears she would shed as a queen would prepare her for the joys she would experience as a religious. And she had no idea that her name would be remembered and venerated centuries later, not for the titles she bore, but for the miracles she would perform. The dawn of the 13th century had brought a special soul into the world. And now, as that soul prepared for its first great transformation, the bells of Coimbra tolled, as if announcing not just the departure of a princess, but the beginning of the journey of a future blessed. The entourage that carried Mafalda of Portugal to the lands of Castile was a spectacle of color and sound, crossing the dusty roads of the Iberian Peninsula like a river of silk and gold. Knights in shining armor marched beside ornate carriages, while banners fluttered in the wind, bearing the symbols of the two kingdoms that would be united through that marriage. Mafalda traveled in the main carriage, flanked by her ladies-in-waiting and protected by a guard of seasoned warriors. Through the embroidered velvet curtains, she watched the landscape shift as they moved farther from Portuguese soil. The green hills of her childhood gave way to drier plains, dotted with castles and monasteries rising like stone sentinels on the horizon. During the journey, which lasted nearly 2 weeks, Mafalda made the most of every moment to pray and meditate. The endless hours inside the carriage became an unplanned spiritual retreat. She recited psalms in Latin, contemplated God's creation through the passing scenery, and prepared her heart for the challenges that awaited her as queen consort of a foreign kingdom. King Henry III of Castile awaited her at the Alcazar of Toledo, a majestic fortress overlooking the ancient city by the Tagus River. When Mafalda arrived at the palace gates, she was welcomed with a ceremony that outshone even the lavish standards of the Portuguese court. Musicians played both Arab and Christian instruments, dancers spun with colorful veils, and the air was perfumed with incense and rosewater. Henry was a young king of noble appearance and commanding presence, but his eyes revealed the burden of ruling a complex and multifaceted kingdom. Castile was a land of contrasts, where Christians, Moors, and Jews lived in constant tension, where the Christian reconquest still left open wounds, and where international politics demanded constant vigilance. Upon meeting Mafalda, he was struck not only by her beauty, but by the serenity she radiated, even amid the excitement of the court. The wedding was celebrated at the Cathedral of Toledo, one of the most impressive churches in all of Christendom. The Gothic vaults rose like arms lifted to the heavens, and the stained glass windows cast rainbows of colored light across the high altar. Mafalda walked down the central aisle, wrapped in a white silk gown embroidered with silver thread, wearing the bridal crown that had belonged to Castilian queens for generations. During the ceremony, as she pronounced her marriage vows, Mafalda felt a special presence beside her. It was as if an invisible light surrounded her, giving her strength to embrace this new responsibility. The bishops presiding over the ceremony noticed something different about the young queen, an aura of holiness that seemed to emanate from her like the scent of roses. The first years of her marriage were marked by a gradual yet steady adaptation to life at the Castilian court. Mafalda quickly learned the local customs, mastered the Castilian dialect, and won the hearts of the people through her kindness and generosity. She established a regular system of almsgiving, personally visited the sick in city hospitals, and interceded with the king on behalf of those seeking justice. Henry admired his wife more and more. He discovered in her not only a loving companion, but also a wise advisor who helped him make difficult decisions. When complex matters of state arose, he frequently sought Mafalda's opinion, and her suggestions almost always proved to be wise. "God has given me a queen worth 100 counselors," he would often say to his courtiers. Queen Mafalda established a way of life that perfectly balanced royal duties with religious devotion. She rose before dawn to attend the first Mass of the day, devoted her mornings to the administrative matters of the kingdom, spent her afternoons visiting the needy or receiving subjects in audience, and ended each day with long hours of prayer in her private chapel. Her beneficial influence extended to every aspect of court life. She encouraged the founding of schools for poor children, supported the construction of hospitals and orphanages, and fostered a spirit of greater harmony among the kingdom's various religious communities. Her presence ushered in a time of prosperity and peace that the chroniclers of the era attributed to her virtues and the divine protection she brought to Castile. For 5 years, Mafalda lived her role as queen consort with great intensity. She accompanied Henry on his official journeys, participated in diplomatic negotiations, and became a respected and beloved figure throughout the kingdom. Her chambers in the Alcazar became a true sanctuary, where courtiers came to seek spiritual guidance and where small miracles began to occur with increasing frequency. Ladies-in-waiting reported that heavenly fragrances would spontaneously fill the queen's rooms, that her clothing remained spotless even after long journeys, and that with a mere touch of her hands, withered plants would bloom. Mafalda listened to these reports with humility, attributing any extraordinary manifestations to God's goodness and the intercession of the saints. But fate, which had set her on a path of constant transformation, was preparing yet another turn. In 1217, when Mafalda was only 22 years old, King Henry fell gravely ill during a military expedition. A mysterious fever consumed him, and the court physicians were powerless against the illness that afflicted him. Mafalda did not leave her husband's bedside for a single moment. Day and night, she cared for him personally, applying cool cloths to his fevered forehead, administering the remedies prescribed by the doctors, and above all, praying without ceasing for his recovery. Her prayers echoed through the palace corridors like the laments of a soul pleading for divine mercy. For 3 weeks, Henry battled between life and death. Mafalda fasted and kept vigil, offering her own life in exchange for his. But when all human hope had faded, she received a vision in a dream that would forever change the course of her life. She saw her husband surrounded by a golden light, smiling with a peace she had never seen on his earthly face. He said to her, "My beloved, my mission in this world is complete, but yours is only beginning. Do not weep for me. Rejoice, for God has entrusted you with a work far greater than that of a queen." The next morning, Henry I of Castile surrendered his soul to the Creator, surrounded by the kingdom's great nobles, with a serene smile on his lips that astonished everyone present. Mafalda closed her husband's eyes with her own hands, kissed his cold forehead, and whispered, "Until we meet again in the Father's house." The mourning that followed was deep and heartfelt. The entire kingdom grieved the death of a young and promising king. Mafalda withdrew into prayer for 40 days, wearing only black garments and consuming only bread and water. Her sorrow was genuine and profound, yet there was in her an acceptance that surprised all who saw her. It was as if, in the midst of tragedy, she could see a greater plan unfolding. Political pressures quickly began to mount. Advisors and nobles insisted that the young widowed queen should consider a new marriage to ensure the kingdom's stability. Marriage proposals arrived from across Europe. French princes, German dukes, and even some Muslim kings sent ambassadors offering alliances through matrimony. But Mafalda had already made her decision. During those 40 days of deep mourning, she had received several mystical visions that clearly revealed what her next step should be. She saw herself dressed in the Cistercian habit, walking through the corridors of a monastery yet to be built, surrounded by sisters who called her mother. These visions filled her heart with a joy that stood in stark contrast to the natural sorrow she felt over the loss of her husband. 1 year after Henry's death, Mafalda convened a solemn assembly at the Alcazar of Toledo. Before the great lords of the realm, the bishops, and a multitude of subjects, she announced her decision to renounce any possibility of remarriage and to dedicate the rest of her life exclusively to the service of God. Her words echoed through the grand hall with an authority that left no room for argument. "My beloved subjects of Castile, I have served as your queen with all the devotion of my heart. But the Lord of heaven now calls me to an even greater service. I renounce the pleasures of the world, the honors of the court, and the prospects of new matrimonial alliances. My soul belongs entirely to Christ, my true and eternal spouse." The impact of this declaration was immense. Many wept openly, others knelt in reverence, and a few murmured concerns about the political implications of such a decision. But Mafalda remained firm, and her determination was so evident that even the most skeptical understood it was futile to try to dissuade her. In the months that followed, she meticulously organized her departure from Castile. She distributed her personal jewelry among churches and monasteries, donated land for the founding of hospitals, and set up a system of support for the widows and orphans of the kingdom. Every act of preparation for religious life was carried out with the same elegance and efficiency that had characterized her reign as queen. When the moment of farewell finally arrived, all of Toledo gathered in the streets to witness the departure of their beloved queen. Mafalda appeared dressed in a simple travel cloak, without jewelry or adornments, yet radiating an inner light that made her more beautiful than she had ever been in all her royal splendor. The journey back to Portugal was a spiritual pilgrimage. With each league traveled, Mafalda felt closer to her true vocation. The familiar landscapes of her homeland emerged on the horizon like promises of a new and transformative future. And when she finally saw the towers of Coimbra, where she had been born 23 years earlier, her heart filled with deep gratitude for every path the Lord had allowed her to walk. The princess had become a queen, the queen had become a widow, and now the widow was preparing to become a religious. Each transformation had been a death and a rebirth, a loss and a discovery, an end and a beginning. And the most extraordinary thing of all was that with each change, Mafalda became more fully herself, the woman God had created to be a light in the world and a bridge between heaven and earth. Mafalda's reunion with her family was filled with tears of joy and longing. King Sancho I, aged by the years and the burdens of kingship, embraced his daughter as if holding a lost treasure finally returned home. Queen Dulce, her hair now silvered with time, held Mafalda's hands and kissed them repeatedly as if trying to recover all the lost years in a single moment. But there was something different about the daughter who had returned. Her parents immediately noticed the deep transformation that had taken place in Mafalda during her years of marriage and widowhood. The young woman who had left as a radiant princess returned as someone sculpted by the experience of loss and refined by prayer. Her eyes still held their familiar sweetness, but now carried a depth that spoke of mysteries contemplated and a union with God beyond words. During her first weeks in Coimbra, Mafalda spent long hours recounting her life in Castile to her family. She spoke of her late husband with tenderness and longing, but also with a serene acceptance that deeply impressed her listeners. There was no bitterness in her words, no rebellion against divine providence. On the contrary, she seemed surrounded by a peace that emanated from her like the fragrance of lilies. When she finally revealed her plans to embrace religious life, her family's reaction was mixed. King Sancho I, a man of deep faith, immediately understood his daughter's calling and gave her his blessing. "If God is calling you to serve him in a special way," he said, "who am I to oppose the will of the Almighty?" Queen Dulce, though she understood her daughter's decision, could not hide a trace of sadness at the thought of seeing her once again leave the family circle. But it was in her sister Sancha that Mafalda found her greatest ally and companion in vocation. Infanta Sancha, a few years younger than Mafalda, had remained unmarried and had always shown religious inclinations. In their private conversations, Sancha confessed that she too felt called to consecrated life, but had never found the courage to make a definitive choice. "My dear sister," said Mafalda one evening as they walked through the palace gardens under the light of the full moon, "I feel that God is not only calling me to embrace religious life, but to found something new. In my dreams, I see a monastery where women of all walks of life can find refuge and peace. Could it be that this is the work He has reserved for the two of us?" Sancha's eyes filled with tears of joy. For years she had been waiting for a clear sign about her vocation, and her sister's words echoed in her heart as the answer to her deepest prayers. "If God is calling us to this mission together," she replied, "how can I refuse? My life is His, to do with as He wills." From that moment on, the two sisters began meticulously planning the foundation of a monastery that would be not only a place of prayer and contemplation, but also a center for charity and education. They spent hours studying existing monastic rules, corresponding with abbesses from other monasteries, and visiting religious communities to learn from their experience. The rule of Saint Benedict particularly appealed to Mafalda, but she felt her specific calling pulling her toward Cistercian spirituality. The Cistercian reform, begun by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, emphasized simplicity, manual labor, and a more contemplative life of prayer. It was precisely this vision that Mafalda had for the community she intended to establish. The choice of location for the monastery came as the result of a series of events the two sisters interpreted as divine signs. During a pilgrimage to the relics of St. James of Compostela, they stopped in the valley of Arouca, a mountainous and remote region that belonged to the Portuguese crown. The place was extraordinarily beautiful, with crystal-clear waters, lush green forests, and a peace that seemed to emanate from the land itself. While resting beside a natural spring, Mafalda had a vision that confirmed her intuition about the site. She saw the valley transformed, with buildings of pale stone rising harmoniously among the trees, bells ringing the canonical hours, and dozens of women in white walking in procession through the monastery gardens. The image was so vivid and detailed that she could describe to Sancha even the architectural features of the buildings she had seen in spirit. When King Sancho IX learned of his daughter's decision to found a monastery in Arouca, he not only approved the plan, but offered his full support. He donated the land, provided financial resources for the construction, and placed at the future nuns' disposal the best architects and artisans in the kingdom. "If my daughters wish to build a house for God," he declared, "let it be the most beautiful and fitting possible." Construction began in 1222 under the direct supervision of Mafalda and Sancha. They did not merely issue instructions from a distance. They were personally involved in every stage of the work, from laying the foundation stones to the finest details of the decoration. Mafalda proved to be an exceptional administrator, combining practical vision with artistic and spiritual sensitivity. The monastery church was designed in the Cistercian style, with simple and elegant lines that directed the eye and heart upward. The windows were arranged to allow natural light to create an atmosphere of reflection and contemplation. The choir, where the nuns would recite the canonical hours, was built with perfect acoustics so that the voices could rise like incense to heaven. But Mafalda didn't limit herself to overseeing the physical aspects of the construction. At the same time, she was working on drafting the constitutions that would govern the life of the new community. Based on the rule of Saint Benedict and Cistercian reforms, but adapted to the specific needs of her vision, she created a monastic code that emphasized prayer, work, study, and especially service to the poor and needy. During the 3 years of construction, Mafalda and Sancha already lived a nearly monastic life. They rose with matins, spent long hours in prayer, divided their time between supervising the construction and preparing spiritually for the religious life ahead. They fasted regularly, practiced charity systematically, and received spiritual direction from Cistercian monks who came from other monasteries specifically to guide them. Mafalda's reputation for holiness began to spread even before the monastery was completed. Workers reported that she would appear at the construction site before dawn, having walked long distances on foot to get there. They said her clothes remained spotless despite the dust and mud, that she carried heavy stones with surprising ease, and that workplace accidents mysteriously decreased when she was present. One particular episode left a deep impression on everyone involved in the construction. A young mason had fallen from a scaffold and was gravely injured, with several broken ribs and internal bleeding. The physicians declared there was no hope of survival. Mafalda knelt beside the dying man, placed her hands on his wounded chest, and prayed with an intensity that caused everyone around her to fall silent in reverence. After several hours of continuous prayer, the young man opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and stood up completely healed. News of the miracle spread through the region like wildfire, drawing pilgrims from distant places. In 1225, 3 years after construction began, the Monastery of Arouca was finally ready to welcome its first inhabitants. The solemn blessing of the building was presided over by the Archbishop of Braga himself, who arrived with a delegation of bishops and abbots. King Sancho I, now visibly aged but beaming with pride for his daughters, attended the ceremony with the entire Portuguese court. On the day of the official inauguration, Mafalda and Sancha, accompanied by 12 other young women who had asked to join the community, formally received the Cistercian habit. The moment when Mafalda exchanged her secular garments for the white and black habit of the order was indescribably moving. She seemed transfigured, as if she had finally found her true identity. The consecration ceremony of the first nuns was followed by the celebration of the first Mass in the newly built church. Gregorian chants echoed through the stone vaults like angelic voices, and many in attendance reported sensing a supernatural presence throughout the entire celebration. The Archbishop himself later confessed he had never experienced anything like it in all his years of episcopal ministry. Mafalda's monastic life began under the sign of humility and service. Although her prior experience as queen naturally qualified her for leadership, she insisted on beginning as a simple novice, submitting herself to the same disciplines and obligations as every other sister. She rose before matins to sweep the church, personally tended the monastery's garden, and served meals with a joy that uplifted the whole community. But the community quickly recognized in her exceptional qualities of spiritual leadership. Her life experience, refined education, and most of all, her deep union with God made her a natural model for the other sisters. In 1226, just 1 year after the monastery's founding, she was unanimously elected abbess by the community, a position she accepted only after much reluctance and long periods of prayer and discernment. As abbess, Mafalda proved to be an extraordinary leader who knew how to combine firmness and tenderness, authority and humility. She established a communal routine that perfectly balanced prayer, work, study, and rest. Her spiritual conferences became renowned not only within the monastery, but also attracted visitors from other convents and even priests who came seeking guidance. Daily life in Arouca under Mafalda's direction was marked by a simplicity that concealed extraordinary spiritual richness. The sisters rose at 2 in the morning for matins, followed by lauds at dawn. The conventual Mass was celebrated with such solemnity and devotion that it turned each day into a liturgical feast. Manual labor was carried out in an atmosphere of silent prayer, transforming simple tasks like tending the garden or preparing meals into true spiritual exercises. Mafalda had a special care for sisters who were ill or in distress. She personally visited each sick nun, tended to them with her own hands, and spent long hours at the bedside of those nearing death, preparing them to meet the heavenly spouse. Many sisters testified that the abbess's presence beside a dying nun brought a supernatural peace that transformed agony into ecstasy. The monastery quickly became a spiritual beacon for the entire region. Pilgrims traveled from afar to attend liturgical celebrations, request prayers, or simply be in the presence of Mafalda, whose reputation for holiness was spreading across the Iberian Peninsula. Many reported miraculous healings after visiting Arouca, and the abbess's correspondence with other religious communities became a treasured source of spiritual guidance. But Mafalda's influence extended far beyond the monastery walls. She maintained an extensive social mission that served the poor throughout the region. She regularly distributed alms, clothing, and food to those in need. She established a free school for orphaned children, where they learned not only to read and write, but also trades that would enable them to support themselves honorably in adult life. During times of famine or epidemic, which were frequent in the Middle Ages, the Monastery of Arouca became a true hospital and relief center. Mafalda mobilized all of the community's resources, sold valuable objects when necessary, and personally cared for the most seriously ill. In those moments of crisis, her leadership shone with a special light, inspiring not only her sisters, but the entire local population. One of the most remarkable aspects of Mafalda's personality as abbess was her ability to form other spiritual leaders. Many of her disciples were later chosen to found new monasteries or to reform declining religious communities. Her correspondence with these spiritual daughters is a treasure trove of mystical wisdom that influenced generations of Cistercian nuns. Mafalda's mystical visions became more frequent and intense during her years as abbess. She regularly received heavenly consolations during prayer, had visions of the Virgin Mary and various saints, and experienced ecstasies that sometimes left her motionless for hours at a time. Yet she always maintained an attitude of profound humility in the face of these extraordinary graces, attributing them to divine goodness and not to any merit of her own. One of the most striking visions she shared with her community was of her own death. She saw herself surrounded by angels who led her to a heavenly palace where Christ awaited her as a bridegroom awaits his bride. This vision brought her deep peace and the certainty that her earthly pilgrimage was drawing to a close, but also filled her with a joyful anticipation for the final encounter with the one who had been the center of her entire life. The final years of Mafalda's life were marked by an intensification of the supernatural phenomena that had accompanied her since youth. The miracles became so frequent that even the abbess herself grew concerned about the attention they attracted, fearing they might distract from the true purpose of spiritual life. Among the most well-documented wonders was her seemingly natural ability to heal illnesses through prayer and the laying on of hands. Children with high fevers recovered their health after her blessing. Sterile women conceived after her intercessions, and even cases deemed hopeless by the physicians of the time found solutions through her prayers. One of the most impressive miracles occurred during a devastating drought that afflicted the region for over 6 months. Wells dried up, crops died, and the people began abandoning their homes in search of water. Mafalda called the entire community to a strict 3-day fast, followed by a penitential procession around the monastery. On the 3rd day, as she prayed prostrate before the high altar, clouds began to form in the clear sky. The rain that followed lasted just long enough to refill the wells and save the harvests. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Mafalda's holiness was her ability to read hearts and consciences. Visitors who came to the monastery with hidden intentions or unconfessed sins often left completely transformed after conversations in which she seemed to know intimate details of their lives that they had never shared with anyone. Her correspondence with prominent figures of the time, kings, bishops, other saints, reveals a woman of exceptional intelligence and deep spiritual wisdom. Her letters were sought after and copied, circulating throughout Europe as true treatises on mysticism and spiritual direction. Pope Honorius III himself consulted her on important matters of the Church, recognizing in her an authentic prophetic voice. During a plague epidemic that ravaged the region in 1256, Mafalda, then 56 years old, worked tirelessly caring for the sick. Against all medical advice and the pleas of her sisters, she personally visited the plague-stricken, washed their wounds, and remained beside the dying. Miraculously, neither she nor any of the sisters who accompanied her contracted the disease, a fact seen by all as a clear sign of her sanctity. But it was in 1256 that what many considered her greatest miracle occurred. A 3-year-old child, the daughter of poor peasants from the region, had fallen into a deep well and remained submerged for more than an hour before being retrieved. When she was brought to the monastery, there had been no signs of life for a long time. Mafalda took the child into her arms, withdrew with her into the church, and prayed throughout the entire night. At dawn, the little girl opened her eyes, smiled, and asked for water, completely restored to life and health. This extraordinary miracle caused crowds of pilgrims to flock to Arouca from all over Europe. The monastery became one of the most important pilgrimage centers in Christendom, rivaling Santiago de Compostela. Mafalda, however, received this fame with ever-deepening humility, attributing all wonders to divine mercy and pleading that people not focus on the miracles themselves, but on the message of conversion and holiness they carried. In the autumn of 1256, Mafalda began to show clear signs that her earthly pilgrimage was coming to an end. At 56, although still relatively young, she experienced a deep weariness that was not physical, but spiritual, the fatigue of a soul that had completed its mission on earth and longed for the final encounter with the beloved. During the final months of her life, her mystical visions intensified greatly. She would spend hours in ecstasy, conversing with saints and angels as if they were visible visitors. Her sisters often found her levitating a few inches above the ground during prayer, surrounded by a gentle light that seemed to have no earthly source. In December of 1256, she gathered the entire community and announced that she had received a dream, revealing that she would leave this life on May 2nd of the following year, the feast of St. Athanasius. The precision of the prophecy initially caused disbelief, but the serenity with which she spoke convinced all the sisters of its truth. The months that followed were a time of intense preparation for the great passage. Mafalda completely reorganized the administration of the monastery, gave detailed instructions for the future of the community, and spent long hours in private conversations with each of the sisters, offering them personal advice and special blessings. When May of 1257 arrived, Mafalda had become almost translucent. Her skin had taken on a luminous paleness. Her eyes shone with a light that seemed to come from another world, and her voice, though weak, carried a supernatural authority that deeply touched all who heard her. On the morning of May 2nd, she rose as usual, attended matins and the conventual mass, and spent the day giving final blessings and bidding farewell to all who came to her. In the afternoon, she withdrew to her cell, knelt in prayer before a crucifix, and remained there until nightfall. When the sisters came to call her for vespers, they found her on her knees, hands folded, her face lit by a smile of indescribable joy. She had passed away gently during prayer, fulfilling her prophecy exactly. The room was immediately filled with a heavenly fragrance of roses and lilies that lingered for days. News of Mafalda's death spread rapidly throughout the region and beyond. Crowds flocked to the monastery to venerate her remains. Her body remained incorrupt for a long time, continually exuding that supernatural fragrance which became one of her most well-known posthumous signs. Miracles through her intercession began immediately after her death. The sick were healed by touching her garments, the blind regained sight by praying at her tomb, and impossible situations found resolution through her prayers. The beatification process began a few years later, and although it was never formally concluded due to the administrative complexities of the time, popular veneration never ceased. Today, 7.5 centuries after her death, Blessed Mafalda of Portugal remains a figure of extraordinary relevance and inspiration. Her monastery of Arouca, though transformed by time, remains a center of pilgrimage and prayer, drawing thousands of visitors who seek inspiration in her life and intercession in their needs. Her legacy goes far beyond purely religious dimensions. Mafalda represents a model of female leadership that combines strength and gentleness, authority and humility, administrative efficiency, and deep spirituality. At a time when women had few spaces for public expression, she exercised an extraordinary influence that extended far beyond the convent walls. The foundation of Arouca became a milestone in the history of female monasticism in Portugal. The monastery was not merely a place of prayer, but a true center of culture, education, and social assistance. The Cistercian nuns formed there carried the model of religious life established by Mafalda to other monasteries and regions, multiplying her influence across the centuries. Her example of conversion after widowhood offers an inspiring model for all those who face great losses and life transformations. Mafalda showed that it is possible to turn pain into a source of spiritual growth, loneliness into deeper union with God, and the end of one stage of life into the beginning of a greater vocation. Miracles attributed to her intercession continue to be reported to this day. Devotees from around the world write letters describing physical and spiritual healings, resolutions to family and financial problems, and extraordinary conversions obtained through her prayers. Though the Church is naturally cautious in verifying such phenomena, the consistency and quality of the testimonies impress even the most skeptical observers. In the region of Arouca, Mafalda is considered not only a saint, but truly the spiritual mother of the entire population. Her annual feast days draw crowds who come not merely as tourists, but as authentic pilgrims in search of spiritual renewal. The tomb where her remains rest continues to be a place of intense prayer and extraordinary manifestations that defy purely natural explanations. Her spiritual correspondence, preserved in archives of various European monasteries, continues to be studied by scholars of Christian mysticism. Her insights on the interior life, her guidance on spiritual direction, and her reflections on union with God remain surprisingly relevant, speaking directly to the hearts of today. For scholars of medieval history, Mafalda represents a fascinating example of how a woman was able to exercise leadership and influence in a patriarchal society. Her transition from court life to religious life, far from being an escape from the world, was in fact a deeper engagement with the needs of her time. The model of holiness that she embodies, combining contemplative prayer and charitable action, interior life and social commitment, authority and service, remains profoundly relevant to the modern world. In an age marked by division and conflict, her ability to unite people from diverse backgrounds around lofty ideals offers invaluable lessons. Her special devotion to the poor and marginalized anticipated by centuries many of the social concerns of today's church. Under her leadership, the Monastery of Arouca pioneered many practices we now consider essential to Christian social outreach. Free education for underprivileged children, medical care without discrimination, support for families in distress, and the integration of people with disabilities into community life. Thus lived and died Blessed Mafalda of Portugal, a woman who transformed every circumstance of her life into an opportunity for spiritual growth and service to others. Born a princess, she became queen, not only of Castile, but of countless hearts that found inspiration and hope in her. A young widow, she discovered in her loss a calling to deeper union with the heavenly bridegroom. Her life was a tapestry, exquisitely embroidered with threads of gold and silver, royal birth and chosen humility, temporal power and spiritual authority, the tears of widowhood and the joy of religious vocation, the solitude of mourning and the fullness of community life, extraordinary miracles and everyday simplicity. Today, as the world desperately seeks authentic models of leadership, genuine spirituality, and effective social commitment, the figure of Mafalda shines as a light that does not fade. She teaches us that true greatness lies not in the titles we bear or the positions we hold, but in our ability to make of our lives a gift for others. Her miracles continue, not only in the physical healings reported by the faithful, but especially in the transformation of lives that find in her example the courage to begin again, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to discover in every ending a new beginning. She intercedes for all who, like her, have learned that life's greatest joys are born from the greatest sacrifices, and that true power lies in serving. Blessed Mafalda of Portugal remains alive in the hearts of all who believe that the world can be changed through personal holiness, that leadership can be exercised by example, and that God can be found not only in silent prayer, but in generous service to our most vulnerable brothers and sisters. May her light continue to shine, guiding pilgrims of every age in search of the only treasure that truly matters, perfect union with God, which is revealed in the total gift of self to others. Prayer. O blessed Mafalda of Portugal, princess who chose to serve the King of Heaven, Queen, who found in widowhood a higher calling, founder of the holy Monastery of Arouca and model of religious life, we come to you in faith and confidence. You who transformed every pain into prayer, every loss into spiritual gain, every tear into a source of mercy, intercede for us before the throne of the Most High. Obtain for us the grace to find God in every circumstance of life, especially in the most difficult ones. Grant us your humility to serve, your courage to renounce what is superfluous, your wisdom to lead with love, and your unwavering faith in divine providence. Protect our families, bless our work, heal our infirmities, and guide our steps along the path of holiness. You who were light on earth and now rejoice in eternal light, make us also instruments of peace and consolation for all who suffer. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. My prayer. O Lord our God, with uplifted hearts we give thanks for the gift of life and the privilege of carrying your love through the stories that inspire and transform us. We thank you, Father, for granting us the strength, wisdom, and courage to share the teachings of your gospel through this channel, which has been a beacon of hope and light amid the trials of the world. Lord, we recognize that each life is a precious gift, and we are grateful for every moment given to bear witness and spread your word. May every story told, every message of faith, and every divine teaching reach the hearts that thirst for love, truth, and reconciliation. We thank you for the inspiration that guides us, for the blessings that multiply, and for the opportunity to contribute to the spreading of Christianity, bringing the light of your love to those seeking direction and comfort. May these narratives touch lives, strengthen faith, and build a community united in the pursuit of peace and the truth that only you can offer. May your grace continue to illuminate us, and may we be instruments of your mercy and compassion, reflecting the beauty of your love in every word and deed. And in the name of Jesus, our Savior, we thank you for allowing us to take part in this sacred mission. Amen. The story of Blessed Mafalda of Portugal teaches us that true nobility is not found in the titles we bear, but in our ability to turn our lives into service to others. She shows us that it is possible to find light in the deepest darkness, hope in moments of greatest despair, and divine purpose even in the most painful losses. Mafalda lived each stage of her life with intensity, as a princess, queen, widow, and religious, always with her heart turned toward God and her hands extended to those in need. Her founding of the Monastery of Arouca represents much more than a historical milestone. It symbolizes the human capacity to create something eternal and transformative, even amid adversity. Her miracles continue to echo through the centuries, not only in the physical healings reported by the faithful, but above all, in the inspiration her life offers to all who seek a deeper meaning for their existence. She proves that it is possible to become a saint in any circumstance, at any time, and in any social condition. Blessed Mafalda invites us to look beyond appearances, to find God in the everyday, and to transform our own story into a narrative of love and self-giving. Her life is a constant call to holiness, a reminder that each of us can be an instrument of divine providence in the world. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel Sacred Stories, share this content with your friends and family, and leave a like so that more people can discover these inspiring narratives of faith and courage. Now we want to hear from you. Which aspect of Blessed Mafalda's life touched your heart the most? Her dedication as queen, her transformation after widowhood, or her leadership as abbess? Share your reflection in the comments below. And don't forget to watch the video above, specially chosen for you to continue this journey of discovery through the lives of the saints who have illuminated our history.